Welcome to the North Texas Church of Freethought's June 11th, 2023 service. We're on a Zoom call this morning. If you're watching this later on YouTube and you'd like to know how to join us for a future Zoom event, go to our website. It's there at the bottom, and enter your email address at the bottom of the page. And while you're there, check out all the other material on the site. Most of all of our new material, though, is going up on YouTube. I haven't put any new things on the website for a while, so look at our other videos here also. Today we're going to have part 2 of the problems of evils. We usually hear the problem of evil, but it's not just one problem, it's many problems. Short version, though, is that the problem of evil is that of how an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good deity can allow so much horrific and pointless misery and suffering that we see in the world. It is perhaps the strongest evidence against the existence of such a deity. It has made many intelligent people, those that dare to think, into atheists, and this is how once Christian fundamentalist New Testament scholar Bart Ehrman has described what finally made him give up his belief in God. Many Godists, as we know, don't give up so easily. When the answer to a puzzle is simple, straightforward, and obvious, but conflicts with their commitment to supernaturalism, they reject facts and reason. Their faith must be saved at any and all costs, so very deeply and profoundly are they invested in their Godism. It's kind of sad, but then again, many of us have been there too. There's even a special term for a solution to the problem of evil besides the obvious one that no all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good deity exists, and the term is Theodicy. Unsurprisingly, and you'll see that word on screen, so if you're wondering how it's spelled, unsurprisingly, as with alleged proof of God's existence, there are many theodicies, though some people distinguish between a theodicy and simply a defense. We previously considered the free will theodicy. This is the claim that all the evil in the world is not God's fault, but rather humanity's fault for choosing to use its free will for sinning. Sometimes this is specifically linked to the Genesis story in which God, remember, he puts Adam and Eve in his orchard, and he commands them not to eat the fruit of these trees. Now, you don't need to watch this other presentation to appreciate this one, but I'll put the link to it in the YouTube description when I post it up on YouTube. Today we'll talk about another theodicy. This is the so-called soul-making or soul-building theodicy. This is a claim, and I'm not kidding, really seriously, that all the terrible pain and suffering in the world is for our own good. Yes, you heard that right. You call it pain and suffering, but God calls it soul-making. Well, there's the devil, that's not God, but he's really an agent of God. He does God's bidding, and of course that's been explored in this interesting TV series we had, Lucifer. Maybe we'll talk about that in the discussion afterwards. But as ridiculous and as offensive and as monstrous as this idea is, Godists nevertheless claim that horrific and pointless misery and suffering builds our character. They say it teaches us the value of what is good. They say that without such evil, we wouldn't even know what good is. They say it allows us to acquire virtues like compassion, courage, and perseverance. Pain and suffering, they say, gives us opportunities to relieve pain and suffering. Moreover, and this is so important for Godists, they say that the hopelessness and despair that comes from overwhelming misery gives us occasions and motivations to turn to God and to pray. Well, this is the old "there are no atheists in foxholes" business. It's factually wrong, but Godists love that one. They should be asking what it says really about foxholes and not what they want it to say about atheists. And why would there be believers in foxholes anyway, much less Christian believers in foxholes? Didn't their God say to resist not evil? But wait, there's more. All the wonderful benefits of extreme and horrific and pointless misery, pain, and suffering, claim Godists, draw us closer to God. This, they say, makes us more fit to enter into eternal communion with God in the afterlife, of course, and that, of course, is the whole point and purpose of earthly existence in their view. In short, we are here experiencing this life, the only life we really know, in order to suffer pain. The more often and the more excruciating, the better, and to be miserable. Only in that way, they insist, we will be able to appreciate and find meaning and joy in worshiping God in the eternal afterlife. Unless, of course, we go to hell. If we go to hell, then we're going to suffer even worse torment for all eternity, but in that case, it would logically follow that we would go on building our character forever. Hell would be the indisputable perfect place to make the best souls of all. Something is seriously messed up there, but before looking at just how messed up this is, and messed up is putting it charitably, consider the fact that Goddess have had a lot of success with this soul-making theodicy. We may call it theodicy for short, or maybe better, S&M theodicy. But how does it work? Why does the S&M theodicy sell as well as it does? Well, when something is pronounced with the greatest authority and assurance over and over again, people come to accept it. As it's often attributed to the Nazi minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, a lie repeated often enough will become accepted as the truth. But guess what? Even this may be an example of what it says, since I've not been able to find where exactly Goebbels ever said this. And why would anyone accept the idea that a minister of propaganda, a good one anyway, would ever admit to lying? Maybe if it was repeated over and over again until it stuck. I did find that Goebbels accused the British of lying, saying that the British follow the principle that when one lies, one should lie big and stick to it. They keep up their lies even at the risk of looking ridiculous. Hitler himself, in his book Mein Kampf, said the same thing of Jews, piggybacked on what Christians have long believed. Here's what he said: in the big lie, there's always a certain force of credibility. Because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature, they more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small lie, since they themselves often tell small lies, but it would never come into their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe that others could have the impudence to distort the truth so impudently. So we see this is generally true of politicians. Many are such good liars, superhuman liars almost, like people capable of astounding physical feats, that it cannot be believed that they're lying. So one never really knows whether one is being lied to or not. Well known that intermittent reinforcement is more effective than the more predictable kind, so that people will keep on trying. In this case, they'll keep on believing, taking people seriously, even when their efforts are futile and they're being lied to. And of course, that's also the secret of the success of casinos. So, is there a certain force of credibility? Are there deeper strata of human sensibilities to which the S&M theodicy appeals? Well, for Christians, there are Bible verses. For example, this is from Matthew 16:20, the last shall be first and the first last. If this refers to how one stands with respect to the amount of pain and suffering, as compared to the degree of comfort and enjoyment one has in life, it's an odd notion. If you really kind of think about it, got to stop and think always. For one thing, it's basically a plea for delayed gratification, isn't it? Don't worry about being first now. We know that being first is the most important thing in life, but by being last for now, you'll be made first later for eternity. It's a promise that if you're patient, you will get your revenge. But if pain and suffering gets you dibs on the best stuff in the afterlife, it means that in that perfect paradise, there will still be a pecking order. Lines to wait in, people jockeying for what? The best seats with the best views of the object of their unceasing worship? Something's not quite right when eternal bliss is modeled after and so includes elements not just of human rivalry, but of rank and status, and of the way those things were generally thought of in ancient times when these scriptures were written. But if what appears to be the most pointless and gratuitous instances of human misery and distress are actually making people better, then it stands to reason, as said already, that some people are going to be made better than others. Some people will be better buddies with God. Some people will get to strum, well, maybe better tuned or more melodious harps than others. Here's another one from Hebrews, the Epistle to Hebrews. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? And by the way, there's other translations of this that instead of chastens, they use terms like chastisement, punishment, whipping, and hardship as discipline. So according to the earliest Christians, a good father beats his children. It's an expression of fatherly love. It meshes with spare the rod, spoil the child, another biblical principle. That's from Proverbs 13:24. It's just terrifying to consider how much damage has come from parents following that rule because they believed it came from God. Here's one. Glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience experience, and experience hope. Again, we see this glorification of masochism almost for its own sake. Almost, because as said earlier, once desperation and despair lead into hopelessness, the godmongers have some supernatural hope to sell you. The Vatican made this lady, Mother Teresa, a saint. She had already been given a Nobel Peace Prize for her glorification of pain and suffering. One medical professional familiar with their hospital in India said that, quote, along with the neglect of diagnosis, the lack of good analgesia, meaning pain relief, marks Mother Teresa's approach. Yet the Vatican got millions of dollars that were given to her organization and that could have been used to provide actual medical care. And please note this meme here, this picture that I pulled off the internet, comes from, if you see the small type down on the lower left, the Father Karapi Catholic channel. This didn't come from non-Catholics or atheists. No, Catholics are proud of this obscenity. Apparently, the early Christian church fathers, Irenaeus and Origen, there's Irenaeus on the left, Origen in the middle. Irenaeus lived 130 to 202 approximately, and Origen 185 to 253. They held S&M theodicy views. Now, in the previous century, the guy on the right there, British theologian John Hick, he died in 2012, was born in 22, became known for promoting S&M theodicy in his 1966 book, Evil and the God of Love. Here's how Hick put it. Men are not to be thought of on the analogy of animal pets whose life is to be made as agreeable as possible, but rather on the analogy of human children who are to grow to adulthood in an environment whose primary and overriding purpose is not immediate pleasure, but the realizing of the most valuable potentialities of human personality. This sounds so wonderful, and as we'll see in a little while, though, it is actually really a worse obscenity than what we saw from Mother Teresa. His argument is that the Bible's account of creation is of biological humans being created that are actually spiritually incomplete, instead of St. Augustine saying, yeah, everybody was perfect, and they just deliberately decided to sin. Spiritual development of humans, Hick argued, is a subsequent process that is not free of difficulties. That's a little disconnect there, too. We're going to get to that. An important aside is that Hick eventually became a bit too liberal for many of his fellow Godists. He came to question whether God would send non-Christians into eternal torment. In a 1973 book of essays entitled God and the Universe of Faiths, he wrote, Christian essence is not to be found in beliefs about God and whether he is three in one and one in three, but in an attitude to man as our neighbor, not in thinking correctly about Christ's two natures as divine and human, but in living as disciples who in his name feed the hungry, heal the sick, and create justice in the world. Of course, many Christians would agree with this, and that's a good thing. It's a whole lot better than saying the essence of Christianity is hating on gays and prohibiting people from getting the medical care that they want and need. But consider also how shallow it is to say that the essence of Christianity is doing what you can to make the world a better place so long as you do it in the name of Jesus. How then is Christianity superior or in any way to be preferred to just doing what you can to make the world better? Indeed, wouldn't it be better to do it just because it's good to do it and just because you want to? Clearly, such questions are corrosive to Christianity specifically and Godism generally. Thinking about such things may also push committed believers, those who cannot do without their supernaturalism, into fundamentalist rigidity and hatred. For these and other reasons, Hick drew criticism from many, including then head of the Catholic Inquisition, Cardinal, and former Hitler youth, Joseph Ratzinger, who became the late Pope Benedict there on the right. There he is as a boy, and in the middle as the head of the Inquisition. Yes, the Inquisition still exists. It's still charged with combating heresies. It's just that for now, only for now, it can no longer torture and execute heretics. It's known as the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and is currently headed by Spanish Jesuit Cardinal Luis Ladaria Ferrer. Now, even without theology and the consequent need for theodicies, there may be a certain force of credibility and a deeper strata of the human condition that make S&M theodicy appealing. Indeed, soul-making is a term credited to this guy, to the English Romantic poet John Keats. Years were 1795 to 1821. That's right, he died at age 25. His short life came, though, at the end of the Enlightenment, generally dated from the late 17th to the early 19th century. Now, here's where it comes up. In a letter to his younger brother in 1819, he wrote, common cognomen of this world among the misguided and superstitious is a veil of tears, from which we are to be redeemed by a certain arbitrary, that's how he spelled it then. Remember, this is before spelling became very standardized. An interposition of God and taken to heaven What a little circumscribed, straitened notion. Call the world, if you please, the veil of soul making. Then you will find out the use of the world. Now, Keats was no Christian. Among other things, he was appalled at the doctrine of blood sacrifice. He also included among his friends the famous Lord Byron, a deist, and Percy Bysshe Shelley, an atheist. But Keats still accepted, as almost everyone did in his time, the idea of supernatural souls. Keep in mind that when Keats died in 1821, Darwin was a 12-year-old boy. Literally, nobody knew anything about the brain at that time. The word synapse would not be coined until 1897. Keats and his two buds, Darwin at the lower left. And in 1828, that was still in the future, 7 years in the future from when Keats died. That's when the German chemist Friedrich Wöhler, that guy in the lower middle, triggered the demise of vitalism, the idea of a supernatural life force that animated living things. And how did he do that? By synthesizing the organic compound urea, very simple compound, but he made it from inorganic precursors. Now, that last may not mean much to you, but Wöhler's making urea in 1828 was the Miller-Urey experiment of that era. Stanley Miller and Harold Urey famously showed in 1952 that a mixture of water, ammonia, hydrogen, and methane, substances common in the universe and thought to have been present on the early Earth, when exposed to electrical discharges, produced a variety of organic substances, including amino acids. So Keats, who was trained in the medicine of his time, which was exceedingly primitive by the 21st century standards, had today what today would be considered New Age views. And probably most of our ancestors in Keats' time did have these views. So keep this in mind as we consider another passage from this letter of Keats to his brother in 1819. That I'm speaking now in the highest terms for human nature, admitting it to be immortal, which I will here take for granted for the purpose of showing a thought which has struck me concerning it. I say soul making, soul as distinguished from an intelligence. There may be intelligences or sparks of the divinity in millions. There's the vital force of vitalism. But they're not souls till they acquire identities, till each one is personally itself. Now, discounting the immortal business, this is reminiscent of our consideration last October on the 16th of what a person is. Keats appreciated, as a majority of the present U.S. Supreme Court justices do not, the chasm of difference between biological human life and self-aware, thinking and feeling human persons. Keats had a sense of the process by which the former gives rise to the latter, though the science of early childhood development, that also lay almost a century in the future. And here's how Keats went on. I will put it in the most homely form possible. I will call the world a school instituted for the purpose of teaching little children to read. I will call the human heart the horn book used in that school, and I will call the child able to read the soul made from that school and its horn book. Do you not see how necessary a world of pains and troubles is to school an intelligence and make it a soul? A place where the heart must feel and suffer in 1,000 different ways. Not merely is the heart a horn book, it is the mind's Bible, it is the mind's experience. It appears to me a faint sketch of a system of salvation which does not affront our reason and humanity. Well, we may speculate on what idea of salvation Keats thought would not affront our reason and humanity. That's a good subject for another time, but notice that the idea of adversity as a creative force is here. Now, we'll get to this later. Just saying about adversity, the kind of things that Leave It to Beaver guy would encounter. And that obviously became an important part of Darwin's theory of evolution, the idea of adversity as a creative force. Without the selective pressures of pains and troubles, remember, there would be no differential survival and reproductive advantages that lead to new and improved traits among populations of organisms, and there would also be no new species. Humanity would not exist had our distant non-human ancestors not faced the creative forces of adversities. By the way, these are horn books. These were used in the schools of the time. They're little pieces of wood on a paddle, and they call it a horn book because it was covered by a very thin sheet of animal horn to protect it, much as today we would use a sheet of plastic of artificial like that. Here's another thing, and I first encountered this quote when I saw way back in 1982 the film Conan the Barbarian. Definitely a story of overcoming loss and adversity. Now, this was the original film with Arnold Schwarzenegger, who you see there, who, by the way, recently said in an interview that he does not believe in an afterlife. I have not seen the 2011 Conan remake, said to have been a box office bomb. So this quote, though, comes from Friedrich Nietzsche's 1889 Twilight of the Idols. It's from a section of aphorisms, so he doesn't really have any further discussion of the idea, so let's remedy that. Quite simply, the claim is false. Losing one's mobility, one's limbs, one's vision, or being grievously injured in any number of ways does not make anyone stronger. Having chronic pain does not make you stronger. Being ravaged by disease, as Keats was ravaged by tuberculosis, which killed him at age 25, that does not make anyone stronger. Oh, sure, these things may give someone occasion to show emotional strength. Many people who are afflicted with serious pain and suffering may find within themselves an ability to endure that they never knew they had. Seeing the courage of those who manage to bear suffering may also impress us and inspire us, but these evils do not make their victims better off than they were. If it were not so, these people, personal injury attorneys, would not have jobs. Notice how they really like hammers. I think their god must be Thor. Nietzsche's statement echoes an earlier observation by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Notice that he says, in general, and the word here is not kill, but succumb. And by the way, those of you who don't know Ralph Waldo Emerson, he was a 19th century American writer, philosopher, very much involved in transcendentalism. Well worth reading. He had a lot of interesting things to say. But this is really a better way of putting things. Succumb, for example, can mean more and different things than being killed or destroyed. And of course, he qualifies it with generally. But succumb can mean just not being incapacitated. It can even mean not being misled or not failing to learn a valuable lesson. You know, killing is a pretty extreme thing. Coming close to death or living in a horrible situation is could be a fate worse than death. Likewise, a benefactor only means that an evil can confer a benefit, not that it makes one stronger or even on the whole better. This sentence comes from Emerson's 1841 essay entitled Compensation. Notice how I showed the lawyer ads right before this. How cute, huh? Compensation. Emerson's essay is well worth reading in its entirety, and it's a good subject for another of our church services too, but what immediately precedes it is this. Sorry it's lengthy, but it's worth, again, considering. Our strength grows out of our weakness. A great man, sorry about the sexism here, ladies, a great man is always willing to be little. Whilst he sits on the cushion of advantages, he goes to sleep. When he's pushed, tormented, defeated, he has a chance to learn something. He has been put on his wits, on his manhood. We would say on manhood or womanhood or your personhood. But that person has gained facts, learned his ignorance, cured of the insanity of conceit. He has got moderation and real skill. The wise man throws himself on the side of his assailants. It is more his interest than it is theirs to find his weak point. Blame is safer than praise. I hate to be defended in a newspaper. As long as all that is said against me, I feel a certain assurance of success. But as soon as honeyed words of praise are spoken for me, I feel as one that lies unprotected before his enemies. Now, there's just so much to think about here. And in the rest of this essay, there's certainly more than the idea that pain builds character. What is relevant now is that all those things that trouble us or cause us discomfort or pain are problems. But not all problems are evils of the sort that figure in the problem of evil. In fact, these kinds of things that Emerson is talking about, I mean, in order to profit from them, you have to put forth some effort. You have to have some background and experience. You have to be prepared to take advantage of these kinds of problems. How to best live our lives, achieve our goals, and discover satisfaction and happiness in life is a quintessentially human problem. But it's not an evil. Not the sort of evil that invalidates claims of an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good deity. So, S&M Theodicy addresses the wrong problem of evil. All life is problem-solving, as the 20th century Austrian-British philosopher Karl Popper observed, and problems can be quite frustrating and troublesome. But while evil is a problem, not all problems are evil, let alone horrific and pointless evils. That's what we're talking about, horrific and pointless evils. Could not be fully human without problems to solve and even puzzles that frustrate our best efforts to understand them. Horrific and pointless evils are different. Even physical pain on a low level, again, not the horrific and pointless stuff. We could think of many of those kinds of things. Because these minor pains and problems teach us not to touch hot stoves, for example. They teach us not to stick our fingers into electrical sockets and really Our bodies alert us from time to time that and where some blood-sucking insect is attacking us. We're glad of that. Likewise, making mistakes, if and when we're able to recognize our mistakes, are a part of life and can help us improve. It's even better when we can learn from the mistakes of others. So there's great value in this idea of soul making in the sense of our growth and development as human beings. But this is very different than the classical problem of evil that the S&M Theodicy is claimed to resolve. To say that it's impossible to reconcile an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good deity with the existence of so much horrific and pointless misery and suffering that we see in the world, that's not to say that any and every unpleasant thing fits into that category of evil. The problem in need of a solution is not that we do not live in a hedonistic paradise. It's not, as Hick put it, that life is not always as agreeable as possible, or one long experience of immediate pleasure, as he put it. As upset as we may be by missing a connecting flight or being fired from employment, these things are not the sort of evil that is the problem of evil. Stubbing one's toe or stepping barefoot on a wayward Lego or dinosaur toy does not disprove God. Although if God's ultimate purpose is the elimination of any and every form of pain and suffering, even the minor ones, and if a hedonistic paradise is what the heavenly hereafter is supposed to be, we may well ask, why didn't God just create that to begin with? Are there rules for soul making that God must follow? And if there are, who or what made those rules? The S&M Theodicy doesn't stand up because pointless and horrific pain and suffering teaches its victims nothing. We're talking about things that do kill people, that do destroy their lives. I mean, I thought about maybe going into detail or finding some really gory pictures, but use your imagination, for goodness sakes. At times it seems some of these things may be worse than death, as I said, and of course that's the argument for euthanasia, and conversely part of the reason why many Goddists so adamantly oppose euthanasia. Granted, probably none of us have ever come close to ever personally experiencing or even witnessing such horrors, but there is no doubt that they happen and that many people have been and continue to be subjected to them. S&M Theodicy is not adequate or credible justification. And what about animals? They have no souls, but they clearly experience terror, pain, and suffering. What is the point of that? Goddists claim that our knowledge of other people's excruciating sufferings, even if we do not suffer or witness it ourselves, helps in our own soul making by teaching us compassion. Well, this is even less acceptable. It is to make what is already horrifying even more horrifying because it degrades suffering other human beings from ends in themselves into mere means to our own ends. But what sort of all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good deity would do that? That is evil on the scale of Joseph Mengele or even Shiro Ishii, the Japanese Mengele. That was a guy, in fact, after the end of World War II, he never had to go into hiding like Mengele did because he was given complete immunity for his crimes. The simple fact is that human parents know that their children need and deserve every protection they are able to give them, and they generally do all they can to protect their children, no matter their age, from coming to harm. If humans are children of God, their supposed divine parent, especially one that is all-knowing and all-powerful, would take at least as much care. That this doesn't happen is strong evidence against the existence of said divine parent. But it's worse than that, because while human adults may benefit from every evil to which they do not succumb, that is not even true of human children. Remember Keats' analogy of the classroom. When a very young child's soul is first coming into being, even Emerson's assertion will not apply, because, again, it takes some effort in order to make use of and find the benefits of the trials and tribulations of life. Children will succumb to evils that adults might easily shrug off. It shapes who they are, because it's soul building, right? Pain and suffering that are far less than horrific inflicted on children deprives them of or corrupts that hornbook needed for them to make their souls. Many of you may have seen this before. This is American writer and family counselor Dorothy Law Nolte's Children Learn What They Live poem. This was written for a newspaper column in 1954 and then widely circulated since. This was the Leave It to Beaver era, literally. That TV show aired from 1957 to 1963. The harsh circumstances of how many impoverished children of the time grew up was then not widely known, and today it is not much better known. The first 4 lines of Nolte's poem suggest the sort of harm that is the result of adversities visited upon children. The rest of them are kind of, oh, look how nice it is if you can do that. But it's well to think about what children learn from other things. I mean, this just barely scratches the surface. Criticism, hostility, ridicule, and shame. Oh my goodness. It is well to think about what children learn from these other things and how should we complete the he learns when a child lives with absent, neglectful, or abusive parents, family members strung out on alcohol, drugs, or parents in jail. How about when a child lives in a crime-ridden neighborhood, is subjected to gunshots at all hours of the day and night, echoing through uh, where they live, and then they're told or hear and see others being told, "You'll never amount to anything." Now add in poor nutrition, exposure to environmental toxins like lead paint and cigarette and other smoke, and inadequate medical care. No, these are not easy problems to solve. Gospels actually have Jesus saying, "For you have the poor always with you." That's twice, both Mark 14:7 and Matthew 26:11, saying, in effect, Jesus saying, in effect, that poverty is an insoluble problem. Why even bother? Sadly, as this graph shows, over the last several decades, the problem of children living in poverty has been somewhat intractable. The harmful effects of poverty on children is not just folklore either. Numerous scientific studies over many years have documented it. In January of last year, a study was published showing a correlation with very high statistical significance. We've talked about what p-values mean before. A p less than 0.0001, highly significant. Only about a 1 in 10,000 chance that it arose by chance. Correlation between lower socioeconomic status and reduction in gray matter seen on brain scans. A study that came out in late 2019 also showed an association between measures of chronic stress, because you can measure cortisol in hair, which of course takes a while to form, and changes in region of the brain that are important in the regulation of emotion. So you might wonder how people get emotionally dysregulated. Of course, they were looking at broad categories, socioeconomic status. Even in middle class and hoity-toity schools, there probably are kids who are bullied and subjected to things that are as bad as what children in more poverty-stricken circumstances experience. They've also found in these studies disruptions in sleep-wake cycles, immune status, and other physiologic measures among these chronically stressed children living in poverty. These are very challenging problems to study, of course. The question today is, why does God permit these evils? The S&M Theodicy certainly cannot apply when it comes to children. And there are a lot of children. There are about 25% of the world's population, 22% in the USA. Every fifth person roughly in the USA is a child, and every fourth in the world generally. Finally, the S&M Theodicy is perversely self-contradictory. If our intuitions about horrendous evils, that they're bad for us, if those are wrong because such evils are somehow good for us, why should we try to reduce them? Is this why the gospel Jesus character says, resist not evil? And if terrible suffering is good for us, we should be trying to increase it. And if what we take to be pointless pain and suffering, in fact, has a point and purpose, if it is part of God's plan because God is so much smarter than we are, then wouldn't it actually be sinful to try to prevent or alleviate such evils? Maybe that was what Mother Teresa believed. And besides thwarting God's plan, wouldn't it be interfering in someone's soul making to keep them from or alleviate their pain and suffering? How about that Good Samaritan? Remember the Good Samaritan story? Maybe the Good Samaritan was the bad guy. After all, he deprived that injured man of a soul-making experience by taking care of him, paying his bills. Maybe the robbers who assaulted the man and left him in the ditch for dead, maybe they were the good guys for giving him a soul-making opportunity. They were the agents of God who were trying to make him have a better soul and improve his character. And so too the priest and the Levite who saw the injured man but passed on instead of stopping to help like the Samaritan were just more theologically well-informed. They didn't want to spoil the man's soul-making. Now, it may also be said, and it has been said, that the soul-making opportunity that comes from horrific evil is not for those afflicted with it, but for others to do something about it. So now we're back to that obscenity of suffering people being made the means to benefit others. And we have the additional problem that anyone acting to help in any specific circumstance, while they may improve their own soul, they're depriving others of the opportunity of improving their souls by helping. So the Good Samaritan prevented the good tax collector and the good prostitute. They were coming along later, and of course it has to be a tax collector and a prostitute because for the story to work, you have to think of other people that the Jews of Bible times looked down upon. What about the tax collector and the prostitute building their souls? They could help that injured man. And again, the Good Samaritan would not have had his soul making if the priest and the Levite had not ignored the injured man. So we see again that the S&M Theodicy is unavoidably self-contradictory. It's just absolutely irrational, nonsensical garbage. There's literally no way to make sense of it. So please, think about it. Just a quick wrap up here to remind you all, and we talk to others about our atheist church. Very simple to explain because our religion is just our opinions about life and its meaning, not about other people's superstitions. We do talk about them because it's interesting to consider how people go wrong. How can you go right? You don't know how people go wrong. We like to learn from other people's mistakes. But our religion is our total reaction upon life, and the church is simply a body of people who share core principles on which they rely in understanding life and its meaning. And in our case, those principles are facts and reason. But we don't believe in supernatural beliefs. And in fact, we're really kind of down on beliefs generally. We say it's not really great to believe in too many things. And the beliefs you do have, remember, they're subject to change, revision, improvement, and what a good thing that is. We do believe facts, reason, and that, of course, takes into account doubt. Facts and reason can't go to work on anything unless there's some doubt. We believe in Clifford's credo, that it's wrong, always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything on insufficient evidence. This was said by W.K. Clifford, also in the 19th century. A lot of smart people came along in the 19th century, but he wrote this wonderful essay called The Ethics of Belief, must reading for any freethinker. And, of course, our principles of reason, as we said, we do want to foster enjoyment. We should be pursuing happiness in the best way that we each know how, and appreciate and discovering the good, and especially love the value that we attach to things and the meaning and purpose that we find, that we discover in life. Quick thing, June 11th, today, kind of an interesting day. In 1776, this was when the Continental Congress appointed Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, Sherman, and Livingston. Never hear too much about Sherman and Livingston, but they were assigned to draft a Declaration of Independence. It's also Hugh Laurie's birthday. You know, the guy that played House on the TV show, the comedian. He's an atheist, one of us. Also in 1910, this is Jacques Cousteau when he was born. I couldn't really find anything about his religious beliefs. He seemed to be a humanist, always talking about science and how to take care of our planet. There's this crazy thing when I went out to look on the internet, if he'd ever said that he was an atheist, which I could not find that he ever did say that. But there's all this stuff out there saying that he converted to Islam on his deathbed or shortly before his death, and his family denying it, and plenty of other people debunking it. But Muslims claim, and if this comes up, I want to arm you, Jacques Cousteau did not ever convert to Islam. Okay? Here's a quote from Jacques Cousteau. Interesting. This is not the kind of thing that Muslims care too much about. Human blood is a testament to life's origin in the ocean. Chemical composition is nearly identical to that of seawater. So thank you and good morning. Visit our website, look at our YouTube page, sign up on our Twitter. We have a social media presence out there. Some links for you, and a reminder that we depend on your continued support. Show up for these meetings, sign on, let us know what you think in our Zoom meetings and in person if you don't have to travel halfway around the world or all the way around the world. And it's easy to go to our webpage and donate, because what we do does take some resources, although nobody's paid a salary, nobody makes any money doing this. Support your values by supporting the NTCOF, because we really can do together what none of us can do on our own. Join us in promoting facts and reason, and of course celebrating doubt. Those things, facts, reason, and doubt. That's our Holy Trinity. Demonstrate your commitment and be the future that you wish to see. And above all, Melius facet, which is to do better. With that, we'll have some question and answer discussion, and we'll go off the record for that. As we'll share all kinds of scary things about each other, maybe. We'll see. Thank you everybody.